we're back again. This module will focus on liquidation preference. Liquidation preference is always a key term in the term sheet that VCs will pay attention to. First, let's see the Investopedia definition of liquidation preference. They define it as a clause in a contract that dictates the payout order in case of a corporate liquidation. Sounds complicated? However, it's actually quite simple. Basically, when your startup is going through a liquidation event, the investor has a higher priority than the founders to claim back the money they put in, either the same amount of the money they contributed or sometimes even more. The reason why liquidation preference is particularly important in startup investment is because typically it is the investor who are putting in the majority of money into the startup company. And especially in seed and early rounds where some investors don't really want to be involved in the board. This, by the way, can be very different in Asia. Technically, the founders can just liquidate the whole company where they usually still have the majority of the shares and take away most of that money. That's why the clause is relevant here. It's not just about how greedy the investors are, but a way to protect the investors too. Now, you might be confused about what a liquidation event is. A liquidation event is when the startup goes through a majority change of ownership. For example, if you are really successful and decide to go IPO, or sadly, you have to shut down the business, or it can also be something in between, where you merge with another entity and have an exit. How investors get back their investment normally can happen in two ways. One is by the amount they invested in. Another is by the ownership they have in the company. There are two major forms of liquidation preference: non-participating and double dip. So, for non-participating investors, whenever a startup is going through a liquidation event, the investors can choose either to get back their investment or returns according to their shareholding, depending on whichever will give them a higher return. On the other hand, for double dip investors, there are two methods for them to realize their return on their investments. First is full participation, basically getting back their investments and returning the leftover valuation amount according to their shareholdings. Here is an example of full participation. So let's say I invest $100,000 in a startup with 10% shareholdings fully participating, and the startup then gets acquired by a major corporation. What will happen is that I will first get my $100,000 back, and if there's any leftover equity after every shareholder has claimed their return, then I will get 10% of that leftover pie. But as you can see, this clause is favorable to investors when your company has a high valuation. There's no cap for those fully participating investors, which can cause an early stage startup to lose a lot when things happen. That's why the most common clause will have a cap on it. This is called cap participation. This clause restricts the investors up to a predetermined amount of return. There's two choices for them to exercise the rights. Either get back their investments plus a share of their surplus amount restricted by a cap, or they proceed according to their shareholdings and no cap. So let's say that I invest $100,000 in a startup with 10% shareholdings with 2x participating, and they recently got acquired by a major corporation. What will happen is that I can choose to get my $100,000 back, and if there's leftover equity after every shareholder has claimed their return, then I will get 10% of that too, as long as the total is lower than $200,000, because we had decided on the 2x participating. If it surpasses $200,000, then I will only receive $200,000. That's when the cap works its way. Another choice I have is to just return based on my 10% ownership. Let's go through some of the exercises to help you understand the concept. First, 1x non-participating. Let's review what non-participating is. investors have two ways to return their money, either through the amount they invested in or by the ownership they have in the company. So if the startup is sold for $1 million, then the investor can either get $500,000, which is their initial investment, or 20% of $1 million, which is $200,000. It's not hard to decide which one the investor will pick, right? Therefore, the founder will get $500,000 as well, because $1 million minus the $500,000 the investor took is $500,000. Moving on to if the company is sold for $4 million. In this case, the direct return is still $500,000. However, the shareholding payout will increase to $800,000 since $4 million times 20%. So the investor will prefer the later option and leave the founder with $3.2 million, which is $4 million minus the $800,000 the investor took away. Now, please complete the 10 million scenario. Hope you get the answer right. Let's move on to the next example. Secondly, 1x fully participating. Let's review what's fully participating. This is when the investor gets back their investment and returns the leftover equity according to their shareholdings. So if the startup is sold for $1 million, then the investor first can get back $500,000 and then 20% of the $500,000 leftover, which is $100,000. This leaves the founder $400,000. Now, try to complete the 4 million and 10 million scenario. Again, the math should be easy. Basically, return the initial investment and divide the leftover based on the ownership. Hope you have gotten all of the answers. Now, let's move on to the last example. Last, 1x cap participating, 3x cap. Let's first review what cap participating means. This is when the investor either gets back their investment plus a share of the surplus amount restricted by a cap, or they proceed according to their shareholdings. So this is probably the most confusing part. Here, you have two choices. Using the 1 million exit as an example. First option, get back the investment, which is $500,000, plus the shares of the leftover, which is $100,000. Another option is the shareholdings payout, which is $200,000. None of those are over 3x cap, which is $1.5 million. So the investor will pick the higher one and leave the founder $400,000. Now it's your turn for the 4 million example. Hopefully your answer is correct. But as you can see, none of the previous cases has touched up on the cap. However, if you work on the 10 million one, you will find out that the first option is 500,000 plus 2.4 million, and the second option is 2 million. So what happens now? Here is where the cap works. The maximum for the first option should be 1.5 million. Therefore, the investor should exercise the second option to get a higher return. That's pretty much the basics on liquidation preference. Hopefully, you were able to get through the courses. There are some numbers to play around with, so if you find it quite overwhelming, please rewatch some of the videos. However, if you are confident with the lesson, feel free to continue, and next, we will talk about the ESOP pool, which is always important for early hiring.